Officials in Ukraine say a Russian drone attack in Kharkiv has killed 7 people, among them a 6-month-old baby. The regional governor said the strike on Ukraine's second largest city hit homes and infrastructure, causing several large fires. This follows Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's announcement of a new chief of staff just a day after he replaced his popular military commander-in-chief. The shakeup comes at a stage of the war when Ukraine is under pressure after months of limited battlefield victories.
In a field in central Ukraine, a Shahed drone lies almost intact. Iranian-supplied drones like this have become a key part of Russia's air war. Relatively inexpensive, they're used to drain Ukrainian air defences and spread fear among civilians. Burned-out cars and damaged buildings show the aftermath of a successful drone strike in a village in the eastern Kharkiv region. 7 hits were recorded. The force of the blast blowing out windows in this house.
I thought they would never come here. It's so remote. But you see, it turns out that they do fly to the middle of nowhere.
As waves of Russian drones and missiles are launched at civilian homes and infrastructure across Ukraine, on the battlefield there are also formidable challenges. After nearly 2 years of fighting, Ukraine's struggling to mobilise new forces. Ukraine's military has said it needs 500,000 new recruits to replenish and relieve the exhausted troops on the front line. Hopes for military gains have also faded, as Ukraine was unable to break Russia's front lines in a counter-offensive launched last summer. So Ukrainian forces have switched to defensive mode, facing relentless Russian assaults in towns like Avdiivka. President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is now betting on a shake-up at the top of the military to turn the war in Ukraine's favour.
To dig a little deeper, let's bring in Marina Miron. She's a military analyst and researcher at the War Studies Department at King's College London. Marina, good to see you again. Russian forces, we heard it there, they're intensifying efforts to seize Avdiivka in eastern Ukraine. Why this fixation on this fairly small city?
Good morning, Nicole. Well, Avdiivka has been very important to the Russian forces since 2014, as a matter of fact, because the Ukrainian troops established a stronghold there. It has a symbolic importance for Russians since they tried to take it for 10 years now. And according to the Russians, Ukrainians use Avdiivka to shell Donetsk. So on the one hand, the Russians would be able to better defend Donetsk and attack Ukrainian troops in the vicinity. However, the other importance, the military strategic importance, is that Avdiivka is on the heights. So it will be easier for the Russians to oversee the area and, of course, defend the city, which has a coke plant, the biggest in Ukraine, producing steel, which would deliver a blow to Ukrainian military industry. And Avdiivka is located next to a railway and a highway, which would make Russian logistics much easier, opening up a route to Kramatorsk and Sloviansk. So having Bakhmut and having Avdiivka would make it much more easier for the Russians to supply the forces if they happen to launch an offensive on Sloviansk and Kramatorsk.
How much longer do you think Ukraine can withstand large-scale attacks on cities like Avdiivka and Kharkiv, especially looking at the difficulties the army seems to be facing in finding new recruits?
Well, I think especially in Avdiivka, the situation for the Ukrainian troops is very critical because they are about to be surrounded. And not only that, supplying them becomes more and more difficult. And they are also lacking artillery ammunition and have to resort to drones. So especially in Avdiivka, it is expected that it might fall very soon. As far as Kharkiv and other places where the Russian forces are actively on the offensive, it still looks like the Ukrainian troops are able to offer resistance. However, given the overall situation, it remains to be seen how long they can fend off Russian offenses across the entire line of contact.
One way or another, it sounds like tough times ahead for the new commander-in-chief, Alexander Syrsky. Why do you think Zelenskyy picked him?
Well, Alexander Syrsky is somebody who is the opposite of Zelenskyy. And in Zelensky's view, Zelenskyy has failed the counteroffensive. He had a very unpopular tactic of defense rather than offense, which Zelenskyy prefers. And Syrsky is, of course, much more pliable. He's been appearing alongside Zelenskyy as early as spring 2023. So Syrsky will be assuming the position in order to do what Zelenskyy says without any conflicts between Zelenskyy and the head of the chief of staff. Therefore, I think on the one hand, his experience being kind of more Soviet-minded general, as well as the fact that he is much more willing to do what Zelenskyy says, makes him ideal in order to avoid conflicts. That being said, he is not well-liked amongst the population, and he's not well-liked amongst the troops. And given the situation, it remains questionable how much change he can bring in.
That was Marina Miron from the War Studies Department at King's College London. Thank you so much for those insights.
Thank you for having me.